It's great to have a chat to you. So are you ready for this? It's all about to unfold.
We are fired up and ready to go.
So COVID is a big factor, obviously. What special provisions have been made for that this year?
Well, you can imagine that it's a big issue for us at the moment to prepare, and it's going to be a very complex election, but we are putting in place a whole range of measures to deal with that. And, without going into all the boring statistics, I think we're using something like 63,000 litres of hand sanitizer, 34,000 litres of surface cleaner. We've got extra staff, measures, and a whole range of things to deal with that particular issue.
Are there any special challenges in aged care facilities because of that? Do you usually go into aged care facilities to facilitate voting?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And this time around, it will be different. We're working with state and federal health authorities and indeed the aged care homes themselves to work out how best to service the residents of those homes. We've got a dedicated team of people that are contacting those homes to make sure that we can provide that service. In some cases, there'll still be visits. In other cases, we'll be relying on postal voting. And again, that's based on health advice. The last thing we want to do is to turn the election into some sort of super spreader event. We're moving very cautiously and carefully with that.
And we've been seeing some shots there just now of people voting in those cardboard polling booths, and they seem kind of close together. Have you had to make special provision because of COVID to put them any further apart or not?
Yes, we've got all sorts of measures in the polling place. And you'll see that we'll be reminding people about social distancing and about whatever the restrictions are under health orders in place in those states at that time. We're taking it very, very cautiously. As I mentioned before, we've got extra staff who'll be helping us deal totally with the issue of sanitisation in the polling place, making sure we wipe down surfaces. We're using, I think normally we use about 100,000 pencils. In this election, we're going to have 4.5 million pencils to deal with the need to keep them clean and to make sure that people are safe. And we think it'll be a very safe place to vote in the polling place.
Now, what rate is Indigenous enrolment at, and have you been working on that, and is it improving?
Yeah, look, Indigenous enrolment, and all of this is an estimate, by the way, just let me start with that, because we don't ask people to declare their indigeneity on the enrolment form. But we are very conscious that the Indigenous rate of enrolment, the estimated rate, is not the same as the general rate of enrolment. And for the last few years, we've really been focusing on this issue. Right now, we've got about 70 partnership models in place all over Australia with a range of Indigenous community groups. They're helping us grow the role. And very pleasingly, since about 2017, the growth of the Indigenous role has outstripped the rate of the general role, and it's also outstripped the rate of growth in the eligible population in the Indigenous community as well. So we're seeing a lot of positive movements, but we're not resting, and we're focused on this issue particularly.
And give us an idea of the provision for people with languages other than English.
We also take that very seriously as well. We translate a lot of our election material into many different languages, I think around 30 different languages, and that's a lot of material, both written and also we reach out with videos and a range of things into those communities. I think this time around, in addition to that, we've got about 21 Indigenous language videos that we're using as well, and we're hoping to grow that even further. And so we really reach into those communities to make sure that people are aware of what their rights and their responsibilities are.
And I put the call out on Twitter to see what issues people would like me to put to you, and one of them that seemed to get a fair bit of support in terms of me asking questions was that controversial advertising that's already popped up with that truck mentioning Xi Jinping and Labor. People keen to know what action the Electoral Commission took, and is it okay for advertising to use the logo of another party?
Look, I know you know this is one of the most complex areas of our legislation, is this whole issue about who authorises messages. The key thing for us to note is that the Electoral Commission does not have a role in truth in advertising, and this is critical. And I know that annoys people, but elections are a contest of ideas, and what we say is it's up to electors to make up their own minds about where that information is. We don't have that role legislatively. It would be wrong for us to do it. On our website, however, there are a whole heap of information and guidance about what you should do with authorising materials. What we say is, if in doubt, authorise. The whole purpose of the authorisations regime is to make sure that voters are aware where information is coming from, who's authorised the information and who's said it. And that's a really critical part of that legislation. We work with parties and candidates. We inform them of what their rights and responsibilities are. And we're also running, for the second election, a large campaign called Stop and Consider. And it's about making sure that electors are aware of the need to judge where information is coming from, to make sure it's from an authorised source.
And on that poster, it seemed to be the case that there was like an official style Labor logo. Is that okay for other parties to use another party's logo in advertising?
As I mentioned, and I haven't seen a close-up of that particular billboard, but I know there are a lot of billboards that go not just at this election, but every election. My understanding is that message is authorised. There's an authorisation message on that from the relevant group that's doing it. And again, if that wasn't the case, that would be different. In terms of the logo, I haven't actually seen that logo. I'd have to have a detailed look at what's on there. But again, the point is to make sure that messages don't confuse voters, and to make sure that messages are authorised appropriately. And that's what our role is, to make sure those messages are authorised. And we'll continue to monitor those.
And Tom, it almost looks like a Cadbury ad with you there in your purple tie and your purple signage behind you. And that was a bit of an issue at the last election, not clashing with Cadbury, but the colours on signage imitating or being very similar on some political placards to what the Electoral Commission colours are. Where does that stand now, and what are you going to be looking out for at this election on that?
It was an issue at the last election. And in a couple of seats, and we've been dealing with those issues. In fact, the particular matter you mentioned went to the federal court, sitting as the Court of Disputed Returns. We obviously have spent a lot of time working with parties and candidates and explaining what their role is in the election, and making sure that they understand that they shouldn't be confusing voters, and to make sure that messages are authorised. Frankly, I would prefer that parties didn't use purple. That was reserved for the AEC, but I don't have the right to demand that. But we will be watching very closely this election to make sure that there is no repeat of what occurred last time, and to make sure that we are working with those parties and candidates so that they're aware of what their role is and what they need to do to make sure their messages are authorised.
Now, is online voting part of it this year? And if not, when is it possible that might happen?
Well, I can absolutely tell you, Joe, that there's no online voting in the Australian election. I know that in the New South Wales state election, there's a limited amount of internet-based voting, or there has been previously. That's not the case federally. It's not in the Electoral Act, and we would only do that when Parliament told us to do it. I would point out that will be an incredibly complex and difficult project. And we will absolutely need to work through that to make sure that it is incredibly secure if Parliament goes down that path. And I think that is likely to be a gift for the next Commissioner rather than the current one.
Okay. And now it's been really convenient at the last couple of elections with people able to step up several weeks before polling day and lodge their vote. Have you got concerns about how popular that has become, and how much of that are you expecting this time around?
Yes, Joe, that pre-poll voting increased dramatically over the last, I think, 3 elections. And I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think that in total, if you added together pre-poll voting and postal voting at the last election, it might have been 40% of the total, or thereabouts, something about 40%. So it has been popular. This election, there'll be a 2-week pre-poll voting period, and postal voting will still be available, and we'll be monitoring that very closely. I would point out that it's a community event, and the whole event is predicated on people turning out on election day to vote, and only then, if you can't turn out on election day, to use one of those other methods of voting. So I'm thinking that a large number of people will still vote on election day. And we'll be monitoring very closely what happens with pre-poll and postal to see whether or not some of Australia's experiences with the pandemic over the last couple of years might impact on the way people vote.
And now, Tom, we've got to leave it there because the Prime Minister is holding a media conference, but I just wanted to make special mention of the fact there's a lot of love out there for your social media team. In fact, they've been answering questions that people have been putting up on Twitter this morning before we had this chat. Twitter can be a really tough taskmaster, but they're pretty impressed with your team.
They're doing a fantastic job. We're very proud of them. It's also part of a deliberate strategy that we built on starting in 2019 to really engage with the community and deal with misinformation and disinformation and make sure that we're the authoritative voice on what occurs at election time. And they're doing a great job.
Okay, Tom Rogers, thanks so much for having a chat to us and good luck with the next 6 weeks.
Thank you very much, Joe.